My wife told me to accept her, claiming I lack ambition in front of her family. The next hours, her brother said, "You'll never be one of us." So I turned the table, literally. Me, 43 male, and my wife Mariel, 38 female, have been together for 7 years. Her family never liked me, but I always thought Mariel was on my side, until she publicly mocked me in front of her family for my lack of ambition. Her brother doubled down later that night. I reached my breaking point and decided I wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. What followed changed everything between us. "So, you're okay with that, right?" Mariel said, swirling her wine and flashing her family that practiced smiles she wore like armor. I stared at her across the long oak dinner table, unsure if I'd heard her correctly. "With what?" I asked. "You know, being the calm, steady guy. Some people climb, and some people stay grounded. It's good that you accept your role." Her aunt chuckled. Her mother made a hum of approval, the kind you'd give a child who remembered to say thank you. Her father just nodded stiffly. And Nolan, her brother, grinned as if he'd just been handed proof of a theory he'd always believed. I forced a tight smile. "Sure," I said quietly, more out of instinct than agreement. And that was the moment. The moment I realized she'd changed, or maybe that she hadn't, and I'd only just removed the blinders. The trip to Greenwich was supposed to be a relaxing Christmas gathering. Mariel and I drove in from Minneapolis. The house was a colonial monstrosity perched near the water, and everything about it screamed exclusive. I never liked going there, but I did it for her. For years, I did things I didn't enjoy for her. This time was different. From the minute we arrived, her family's passive-aggressive jabs began. Franklin, her father, asked if I was still reading books to kids for a living, followed by a dry comment about how real work builds empires. Celia, her mother, didn't speak directly to me unless asking if I'd please change out of flannel before dinner. I was used to it. I thought I had built tolerance for it. But Mariel had never, ever played along with their smug commentary before. Now, she wasn't just playing along, she was leading the orchestra. Later that night, most guests had retired to the lounge or their bedrooms. I found myself in the game room, nursing a glass of scotch that tasted far more expensive than anything I'd ever buy for myself. Nolan came in, loosened tie, 2 drinks ahead of me. He walked around the pool table like he owned it, like he owned the whole damn house. "Gotta say," he started, chalking the cue. "You've got balls, man. Not a lot, but just enough to show up here knowing no one thinks you belong." I said nothing. I didn't trust myself to speak. "Mariel," he continued. "She used to be the brightest one in the family. Fast-track career, East Coast offices chasing her down. And then she marries a librarian from the Midwest. It's almost poetic." He paused, looked at me. "You'll never be one of us. That's not even a bad thing, Kalen. Some people just don't make it past the gate." I stood there for a moment, watching him, listening to the sounds of laughter from the other room. And suddenly, it all hit me at once. The years of being sidelined, of being condescended to, of being treated like a decorative afterthought. He smirked. I left the room without saying another word. I walked to the dining room, now empty but still glowing from the overhead chandelier. The long, antique table stretched across the space like a runway for judgment. I stood at the end, looking down its length, remembering what Mariel said earlier. Some people climb, some stay grounded. She meant it, not as a cute metaphor, not as an observation, as a judgment, and she wanted me to accept it. I returned to our guest room. Mariel was already in bed, scrolling on her phone. "I'm going to head out tomorrow morning," I said. She didn't look up. "What? What?" "I need some air. Space. Whatever. Can we just talk about this tomorrow?" she muttered, clearly uninterested. That's when I realized she didn't think anything was wrong. To her, this wasn't a betrayal. It was normal. Expected. Something inside me burned. But I didn't yell. I didn't throw things. I went back downstairs. By then, a few family members were still sipping wine, chatting near the fireplace in the living room. I walked in and cleared my throat. "Sorry to interrupt," I said. All eyes turned. "I just want to say something quickly. A toast." A few people raised eyebrows. Someone handed me a half-full glass. I didn't take it. "I want to thank you all," I said, voice steady, "for showing me something important. That there are 2 kinds of people in this world. The kind who build ladders so they can look down at others, and the kind who build tables so people have a place to sit." Franklin frowned. Celia's lips tightened. Mariel had walked into the room, standing near the archway. I could feel her eyes on me. "I know you think I lack ambition. Because I don't chase wealth or titles. Because I help little kids fall in love with reading. Because I don't dress in tailored suits or drink wine that costs more than my car insurance. But I have peace. I have purpose." I paused. "And I had love. Or so I thought." Mariel's expression didn't change. That silence told me everything. I looked down at the massive centerpiece, a crystal vase filled with imported pine cones and holly, sitting atop a mirror plate. Without thinking, I lifted it and slammed it onto the table. It didn't shatter, but the crash echoed through the house. The mirror cracked and wine glasses shook. Everyone froze. I looked around the room one last time. This table, this family, you can keep it. And then I walked out. I didn't sleep that night. I packed quietly, left at sunrise, drove up the coast without a real destination. Ended up in New Hampshire with an old friend who ran a small bed and breakfast. Mariel didn't call, didn't text. The next day, she emailed me. Let's make this easy. I'll have the lawyer send you documents. You can stay in the house until it sells or until you find a place. Whatever you want. I think we both know it's over. That was it. The drive back to Minneapolis from New Hampshire took longer than it should have, mostly because I kept pulling off the road to think. I wasn't crying. I wasn't angry. I wasn't anything. I was flatlined, emotionally muted. I kept running the weekend through my mind, rewinding certain moments like I could go back and rewrite them. But the vase breaking on the table, that sound had burned itself into my memory. That was the sound of the end, not just of the dinner, of the marriage. When I got home, the house was just as we left it. Our coats still on the hooks, her favorite mug still in the sink. It felt like trespassing, like stepping into someone else's life. I stayed in the guest room that night. Couldn't bring myself to sleep in our bed. Her scent still lingered on the pillows, and I didn't want to erase it yet. As much as I wanted to move forward, part of me wanted to sit in the pain a little longer, to absorb it, to let it become something I could name. 3 days later, I received the email from the divorce attorney. Straightforward, efficient, like her. The terms were clean. No kids, no debts, no shared business interests. She offered to buy me out of the house at a fair price, above market value even. That alone told me she wanted it done quickly. I accepted, not because I didn't want to fight, but because there was nothing left to fight for. A few weeks later, after the papers were signed, I moved into a one-bedroom apartment near Lake Harriet. Modest, old hardwood floors, a tiny galley kitchen. But it was mine. I bought secondhand furniture and brought over only what I needed: my books, my records, my bike. Everything else I left behind. I'd never realized how much of the house was hers until I saw how little I'd taken. The first morning in the new place, I made coffee in a $15 thrift store drip machine and sat on the floor, watching the sun crawl up the opposite building's brick wall. It was the first time I'd felt something like peace in months. I went back to work at the library the following Monday. My coworkers, bless them, knew something had happened but didn't press. My supervisor, Julianne, just handed me a fresh stack of returns and said, "Take your time getting back into the groove. We're glad to see you." There was something grounding in the simplicity of the library, the quiet, the predictability, the community bulletin board that never changed. It was the antidote to everything I'd just walked away from. And over time, something interesting started to happen. I started to feel like myself again. Not Mariel's husband. Not Nolan's target. Not Franklin and Celia's disappointment. Just Kaylin. About 2 months after the divorce, I bumped into an old acquaintance at the co-op grocery store. Her name was Anika. We'd gone to college together, crossed paths at a few art openings years ago. She had the kind of presence that made you forget what you were about to say: warm, grounded, unapologetically quirky. She was wearing paint-splattered jeans and talking to the clerk about beats when she spotted me. Kaylin. I hadn't heard my name said like that, like it mattered, in a long time. We talked for 15 minutes near the bulk bins. It felt easy, natural. She was divorced, too. A middle school art teacher now, living with her dog and her chaotic houseplants. When we parted ways, she paused and said, "Let me know if you ever want to sit and drink something warm and talk about what life looks like when your blueprint goes up in flames." I smiled. That's oddly specific. She grinned. Isn't it? We met a week later. Coffee at a tiny cafe near Minnehaha Falls. It was snowing lightly, and we sat near the window, our boots dripping water onto the floor. We talked for hours. Not about romance or hopes or the future, but about the middle. The gray space between endings and new beginnings. "I think people always want to rush to the silver lining," she said at one point. "But sometimes you've got to sit in the cloud first." She was right. That night, I didn't feel like a failure. I felt human. Mariel never reached out. Not once. No birthday text. No awkward check-in. Just silence. A clean severing. I would be lying if I said I didn't sometimes check her LinkedIn out of curiosity. She got promoted, again. Moved to Chicago. Bought a condo with a skyline view, according to Zillow. Her profile photo was professional, poised, perfect. There was no room in that life for a librarian from Des Moines. Maybe there never had been. But I also realized something else. She hadn't destroyed me. I'd given her that power for a while, but it was mine to take back. And slowly, painfully, I was doing just that. Anika and I never dated in the traditional sense. We just shared space. We hiked sometimes, went to gallery walks, cooked together on Sunday nights. One evening, I helped her rearrange her studio, and she asked me to stay for dinner. We ended up sitting on the floor, eating stir-fry out of mismatched bowls, talking about music and loss, and how sometimes the only way to grow is to be broken first. I didn't know what it would become. I didn't need to. By the time spring thawed the sidewalks and cracked the ice on the lakes, I had stopped flinching when I heard Mariel's name. It wasn't that I stopped thinking about her. Grief doesn't work that way. It's more like she became a memory I could fold away without needing to relive every frame. Anika and I had fallen into an unspoken rhythm. No labels, no pressure, just companionship. She had a kindness I wasn't used to. Not the performative kind, not the "I'll be patient if you do what I expect" kind. Her kindness was quiet, patient. She'd sit with you in silence and never ask you to be louder. That was new for me. One afternoon in early April, we took a drive out to Stillwater, just because. The St. Croix River had just started to thaw, and the shops were opening for the season. We wandered into a bookstore where the owner had a cat named Horace that slept in the poetry section. She bought me an old copy of Leaves of Grass with someone else's notes scribbled in the margins. "This reminds me of you," she said. Grounded, gentle, honest. I almost teared up right there in the store. Not because of the book, but because she saw me. Really saw me. And not as someone who needed fixing or elevating or upgrading. She didn't make me feel small. I hadn't realized how small I'd felt for so long. Then came the email. I hadn't heard from Mariel since the divorce papers were finalized. We'd gone almost 5 months with zero contact, which felt like the emotional equivalent of cauterizing a wound. Blunt, but effective. But then, on a random Thursday evening while prepping soup, I checked my email and saw her name. Subject: I thought you should know. It was short. Just a few lines. "Nolan and I haven't spoken since Christmas. He said some things to you I didn't know about until recently. I want to say I'm sorry, not for him, but for not stopping it. For not standing up for you. I've been doing a lot of thinking. I hope you're okay." That was it. No signature. No plea to talk. Just that. I reread it twice, trying to feel something. Anger? Regret? Closure? But instead, I just felt tired. I didn't reply that night. Or the next. Not out of pettiness, but because I didn't know what to say. Her silence had been loud. Her absence, sharper than her words. This sudden flicker of reflection felt like walking into a house I used to live in and finding a new family had moved in. I recognized the furniture, but nothing fit anymore. I didn't tell Anika right away. Not because I was hiding anything, but because I needed to sit with it myself first. I eventually brought it up over dinner the following week. She reached out, I said, handing her the plate of roasted carrots. Mariel's name hung in the air like a song played in the wrong key. "Oh," she asked, casual but not dismissive. I showed her the email. She read it once and handed my phone back. "Do you want to talk to her?" I shook my head. "No. I think she just needed to say it out loud. Or in writing, anyway." Anika nodded and returned to her meal. "Then I'm glad she did. And glad you don't have to carry it anymore." A few weeks after that, I ran into Nolan. It was unplanned, completely random. I was at a speaking event hosted at the downtown library, something about storytelling and modern media. I'd been asked to introduce one of the local authors, and after the panel, I was chatting with some attendees when I saw him across the atrium. He looked the same. Expensive coat, phone in hand, bored expression. But when he saw me, he froze. And then, surprisingly, walked over. "Kalen," he said. No smug smile. No sarcasm. I waited. "I didn't expect to see you here." "Same." He looked around. "I was meeting someone. Book investor. Thought I'd stop in." A beat passed. Then another. "You know," he said finally. I shouldn't have said what I did that night. I looked at him, studying his face. His eyes weren't dancing with the usual superiority. They looked tired. Maybe even embarrassed. "You didn't just say it," I replied. "You meant it." He nodded slowly. "Yeah, I did. Back then. It was easy. You were the easy target. Midwest, quiet, no flash. You didn't fit into the world we built. And now, he rubbed the back of his neck. Now I'm not sure that world matters anymore. The family's falling apart. Dad's health is slipping. Mom's obsessed with social status. Mariel barely calls." I said nothing. I thought ambition looked like stock options and corner offices. Now I just feel empty. You ever feel like that? I gave him a half smile. I used to. Then I realized I was just living in someone else's story. He blinked. Maybe surprised. Maybe impressed. Or maybe just sad. "I envy you, man," he said. "You knew who you were." I don't think I ever did. I didn't know how to respond. He didn't wait for one. Just nodded. Then walked away, disappearing into the crowd. That night, I sat on my small apartment balcony, a blanket over my legs, coffee in hand. The city was quiet, the kind of silence that only happens in early spring, when even the wind seems to exhale slower. I wasn't angry at Nolan. Not anymore. I wasn't even angry at Mariel. What I felt was distance. Like I'd crossed a bridge and could still see the shore behind me, but it was fading into the horizon. And in that moment, I realized something. Leaving wasn't the brave part. Staying gone was. The days after running into Nolan passed in a blur, not because I was shaken, but because I wasn't. And that surprised me. If he'd said those things to me 6 months earlier, about feeling lost, about everything falling apart, I would have clung to it. I'd have replayed his words in my head for days, trying to mine them for meaning, maybe even hope. But now it felt like watching someone walk into the storm I'd just left. There was a time I thought I'd do anything to be accepted by Mariel's family. to belong to that world, to impress them, or at least not offend their sensibilities by simply existing. But the moment Nolan spoke like a real person for once, not an emblem of that suffocating world, I realized something kind of profound. I didn't want to be part of their world anymore. And, truthfully, maybe I never did. Anika started leaving her toothbrush at my place. It started casually, a brush in the medicine cabinet, then a pair of her wool socks in the drawer. I didn't say anything, and neither did she. It wasn't a conversation, it was just happening. Naturally, we still didn't call it anything. We didn't need to. One night, she came over with her hair still wet from a shower and carrying a bag of groceries. She looked tired but happy. I had a kid in class today paint a self-portrait with 3 eyes, she said, dropping a bundle of asparagus onto the counter. When I asked him why, he said, because I see things no one else sees. I think he's going to be a philosopher or very high-functioning weird. I laughed, chopping onions while she unpacked the rest. That's what we were now. Dinner, shared stories, small comforts. No fireworks. No sweeping declarations. But it felt like something real. Something that asked nothing of me but to be there. Then came the letter. Yes, an actual letter. From Mariel. It arrived one Friday in May, sealed in a plain white envelope with no return address. The handwriting on the front was unmistakable, elegant, slanted, too perfect to be spontaneous. She always wrote that way, even on post-its. I debated for an hour whether or not to open it. Eventually, I poured a whiskey, sat on the balcony, and opened it like it might detonate in my hands. Kaylin, I don't know if this will ever reach you in the way I hope, but I needed to write it down. There are things I never said because I was afraid. Of being wrong. Of being seen as weak. Of admitting that I broke something I never really deserved in the first place. When I said you lacked ambition, I didn't realize I was projecting my own restlessness onto you. You were content, and I mistook that for complacency. You had peace, and I was addicted to motion. I couldn't understand your world, so I judged it. I keep thinking about that night. The crash of the vase. The look in your eyes. You weren't angry. You were done. That was worse. You were already gone before you left the room. I'm not writing to ask for another chance. I know I lost at the moment I stopped protecting you from them and started siding with them. I'm just writing to tell you. I see it now. I see you. And I'm sorry. And I folded the letter once, carefully, and set it on the table. I didn't cry, but I sat with it for a long time. I told Anika about it a few days later, on a walk around Lake Nokomis. She didn't ask if she could read it. She just listened. When I finished, she looked out over the lake. Sounds like she's just now becoming who you needed her to be back then. Maybe, I said. Too late, though. She nodded. Yeah, but sometimes we need to say it out loud, even if the timing's wrong. Doesn't mean it changes anything. I like that she didn't feel threatened. That she didn't turn it into a competition or a test. She understood something deeper. This wasn't about winning. It was about healing. That summer, I started leading community book discussions again at the library. Something I'd stopped doing during the mess of the divorce. Our first group read was A Man Called Ove. Fitting, really. A story about grief and neighbors and how we're all just trying to hold it together. People came. People stayed late. Some brought cookies. Others brought stories. A teenage boy talked about his dad walking out. A retired woman shared that she hadn't read a book in years until this one. One night, after everyone had gone, Julianne poked her head into the reading room. You're good at this, she said, smiling. At what? Making people feel like they matter. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded. One Sunday in late July, Anika invited me to her classroom. She was setting up for the school year. New paints, bulletin boards, plastic tubs filled with markers and scissors. I helped her hang up posters and align the desks. You ever think about teaching? She asked, stapling a row of student name tags. Me? Yeah. You're patient. You explain things without making people feel dumb. And you've got that librarian voice. I laughed. I think that's just years of telling teenagers not to make out in the biography section. Well, she said, maybe you've got more to offer. It was the first time in a long time someone suggested I could be more, and didn't mean it as a criticism of who I already was. A few days later, I received another letter. This time, from Celia. Yes, her mother. It was brief. Almost cold. Kaylin, I won't pretend to understand your choices, or Mariel's. But I will say this. You were always kinder than you needed to be. I didn't appreciate it then. I suppose I do now. Celia, that one I did laugh at. Not because it was funny, but because it was so on brand. Like she couldn't bring herself to admit she'd misjudged me without also wrapping the compliment in bubble wrap and distance. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. That fall, the leaves in Minneapolis turned late. The maples outside my apartment burned orange into mid-November, like they weren't ready to let go yet. I understood that feeling. Anika and I had started sharing our time more deliberately. She wasn't just around anymore. She was part of my life. My routines changed. My world stretched to fit hers. She painted on weekends. I worked on a manuscript, something between a memoir and a series of essays about library life, community, and identity. I had no plans to publish. It was more for me than anyone else. But it felt good. And that mattered. Then one afternoon, a former coworker of Mariel's reached out through LinkedIn. His name was Lionel, and we'd only spoken once or twice years ago, mostly during events or fundraisers Mariel dragged me to. He left a message. Hey Kaylin, this may be random, but I've been following your writing blog. Very cool stuff. I also wanted to give you a heads up. Mariel's company is doing a PR piece on community impact, and your name came up in a meeting. Thought you might want to know. She pitched it herself. I stared at the message for a long time. She pitched me. I hadn't spoken to her in nearly a year. I hadn't even replied to the letter. It didn't take long to confirm it. Her company had launched a new campaign on connecting corporate ambition to grassroots purpose. It was slick, hollow stuff, the kind of PR you could smell from a mile away. And there, in the draft version of their case study, was my name. A flattering paragraph, talking about my work at the library, my role as a community educator, and how Mariel Beckett's past partnership had helped nurture socially conscious leadership. I laughed, out loud. She was using me as a marketing tool, dressing up my story like a trophy. The same woman who once told her family I had no ambition was now trying to showcase me as a shining example of grassroots influence. I let it sit for a couple days. I didn't stew. I just observed, thought. Then I made a few calls. The library I worked for had deep connections with the local paper. I pitched a story, The Quiet Power of Showing Up. A first-person reflection on the importance of community spaces, consistent care, and the dignity in small lives. They loved it. I included my journey, not just my work, but the contrast of being underestimated. How people often confuse humility with failure. How being dismissed for not chasing wealth is still one of the quiet prejudices in this country. I didn't mention Mariel by name, but I didn't have to. The timeline was clear. The quotes, even more so. I made sure it ran the same week her company's PR campaign launched. The headline read, I was told I lacked ambition. Turns out, I just had different priorities. It went mildly viral. Teachers shared it. Librarians reposted it. Even a few city council members passed it around during a community meeting. And here's where it all clicked into place. A week later, I received an email from a producer at a local public radio station. Hi Kaylin, we loved your article. Would you be interested in coming on air to talk about how ambition is defined differently across cultures and classes? We think it's a powerful narrative, especially in light of the recent corporate initiative from Mariel's company. Would be great to contrast. That was the moment. My quiet revenge. Not cruel, not vindictive, just honest, measured, poetic. I didn't drag her name through the mud. I didn't scream. I didn't rage. I just stood tall, finally, in the full light of my story, and let her squint. I went on the radio, talked about the importance of emotional labor, of investing in people over profit, of choosing a slower life not because of fear, but because of value. Anika listened from her classroom. Later, she said, that was the most you thing I've ever heard. A clapback dressed in compassion. I smiled. That's the only kind I've got. A few weeks later, I got a brief message from Mariel. Well played. That was all. I didn't respond. Because by then, I'd stopped needing to. The library promoted me quietly, not with fanfare, but with deeper trust. I was now in charge of developing new outreach programs. One of our projects, a mobile library van, was named the Kaylin Cart by the local teens. It made me laugh every time I saw the decal. Anika and I eventually moved into a little craftsman-style house near Powderhorn Park. Old floors, small kitchen, big backyard. She built a studio out back. I kept the front room filled with books and tea. We weren't flashy, but we were good. And here's the truth. I didn't need a trophy wife or a powerful last name to feel whole. I just needed room to grow without apology. And in the end, my lack of ambition turned out to be exactly what saved me. Because ambition, real ambition, isn't about rising above others. It's about rising into yourself. My ex-wife publicly mocked my ambition in front of her elite family. Her brother told me I'd never be one of them. A year later, she tried to use me as PR for her company's community campaign. I turned it around with a public article and radio appearance that went viral, without ever naming her, and exposed the hypocrisy. I got promoted, found real love, and never had to shout to be heard. Quiet revenge is best served with peace.